Okay, so welcome to this session. We're going to be covering the JS2 CA, the social media CA. In particular, we're going to be looking at JWT flow because this is a little tricky and it's not necessarily like obvious what you're supposed to do. So I have a project set up here. It's very basic. If I click these links, there's not anything written into these files yet. All I have is Bootstrap and one JS file with like the API details. So I'll go over to the project. This is the README, which is the content we're going to be working through today. So we've got 4 goals: register profile, authenticate profile, which is the same thing as logging in. It's just the kind of technical word for it. Then we have using the token to interact with the API, and then logging out. So that's what I want to cover in this session. If we have extra time or if there are questions, then we can go over some other topics as well. And then for each of these goals, I've broken them down into smaller steps. So you can see for register, the steps are to create a form with the right field names, and then to set a listener on that form, and then to send the details from that form to the API, and then show a sort of user-friendly response indicating that they have registered. Similar thing for authenticate. We need a form, we need an event listener, we need to send those details to the API, and there's an extra step here, which is that we need to store the token that we get back. Interacting, this is going to be the biggest chunk of the session because there's a lot of different endpoints to interact with here. But generally speaking, I've said create a function that allows us to fetch with a token, create various HTML forms for like creating a post, editing your profile, create the functions that are going to handle the API interactions behind those forms, and then show user-friendly responses. Logout is very, very simple. In fact, I'm going to move logout up here because that one's very quick. So we can change this as well. Okay, so that's the order that we're going to tackle these different requirements. And this does actually cover all of the like hard requirements for your CA, as in the requirements can be met quite simply without too much UI. Obviously, we're going to want to make a nice UI, and that's where actually a lot of the time goes is user interaction rather than actually like sending stuff to the API. Once you've got the API methods down, they should be working all the time. So I'm not going to be doing too much in terms of UX, UI. I'm going to be keeping things pretty simple. When you land on a page, that like if you land on the login page, you will get the login content. I'm going to avoid modals, and I'm going to avoid like a single page application style for this, just to try and keep it simple and not overcomplicate it and not spend too much time on the wrong things. Because ultimately, when we're grading this, we're not going to be grading you based on how good it looks or whether it has like the best UX in the world. We're interested in, does it work? Does the API interaction work? Can you log in? Is it functional? It's always desirable to have a good-looking site with a good user interface, and that's where your time should be spent, like after you've hit these core requirements. Okay, so let's take a look at the project I've got here. If anyone is wondering what these errors are, I've got Grammarly Grammarly extension installed. So it's going to be trying to correct my grammar whilst I'm coding, which I don't think I want right now. So I'm going to just reload VS. Okay, so this should be quite familiar to those that have completed the CSS Framework CA, because I've used almost the exact same structure. If we look at package.json, I have the same build script, I have the same watch script, and I've just added a new one here, which is it runs the build and then it opens live server once the build has completed. So this isn't going to live update Sass, but I'm not going to be doing anything with Sass because I'm just using it to import default flavored Bootstrap. I'm not doing any customization because that's not part of this exercise. So I'm not really worried about live reloading Sass. I'm more worried about live reloading JS, and that is going to happen automatically thanks to live server. So in my source.js folder, I've got an API folder inside, and I've got an index file. And at the moment, my index file is just logging the contents of the constants file. And if I go over here, all that I've got here is my API constants. So I've got the host URL for the API, and that's the base URL. So none of the API v1 stuff. Then I've got the API base, the social base, and finally this one collects them all together so that if we look at the console and see how that looks once they've been assembled, we have our onRender API v1 social path. So that's what we're going to be using we're going to be prepending every single URL we handle with this. So if we had if we had posts URL, it would be /posts, and then we would be saying we actually want to store this as a variable. So we're going to be saying API path plus post URL, and that's how I'm going to be forming all of my URLs. The nice thing about having this prefix is that we can then just refer to stuff like auth login or auth register instead of writing out the full URL every time. So that's the only work that exists in this repository right now. I then have the blank files, and just to talk about how I've structured the HTML here, I have a folder for every single page. So if there's a contact page, there would be a contact folder, and there would be an index.html file inside the contact folder. I think there's a misconception that index.html is only for your home page, but that is not what it's for. An index.html file is the entry point for a folder. It can be any folder in the world. So the job of an index file is to represent the contents of a folder. When we're talking about a web page, that means a visual representation. So you could have like a folder called gallery, and you have 1,000 images in that gallery folder. If you have an index.html file in that gallery folder, you would expect that it's going to show all of those images because it's an index, like an index in a book. You crack the book, you look at the index, and you immediately see where all the resources are within that book. So that's the analogy to think of when it comes to this. And the reason I'm doing this is that if we go to the app and we click on one of these links like login, we can see the URL is /profile/login. It's not login.html. It's a folder. It's actually this login/index.html. So I have one of these set up for every single URL I want to provide in the site. So I have profile and I have feed so far. And within profile, you have edit, login, register, and index, which means that we can go view profile, and the URL will be /profile. We can say edit profile, and now the URL is profile/edit. And when we log in, it's profile/login. And when we register, it's profile/register. So that's a nice format because each of these actions, or each of these documents, I should say, they all relate to the profile, so it makes sense to form a hierarchy with these pages so that it's clear that the thing you're going to be editing is the profile. It's not like the alternative would be something like profile edit.html. But using the folder structures to create a hierarchy, it helps other people when they join your project or when they're looking at your project, because it's really clear which HTML files are related to each other. And it's also good for the user because they can glance at the URL and get a very quick idea of where they are and what they're doing. Okay, I'm just going to be taking a break every sort of 10 minutes or so to check the comments. And for the sake of editing, I'm not going to talk whilst I'm doing that. So if you think it's weird that I'll occasionally go silent and look at the comments, that's because it's a headache trying to cut it out and edit it. So, okay, so I think we have got a good idea of where this project is. It's very basic, but it's set up nicely. The first thing we're going to be doing is registering, because that's the first thing that a user has to do when they are interacting with the site. It wouldn't really make sense to build the post or the profile kind of get functionality first, because you need a token to access that content. So very sensible place to start is with the register functionality. So if we click into this page and take a look at the index, we've got navigation and we have a blank form, and I've given it the ID of register form. So there's a lot of value you can get out of HTML forms. You can actually save yourself a lot of time validating with JavaScript by using the correct input attributes. So I'm going to quickly demonstrate those. So the best way to think about a form is that it is the companion to the API request. So the API request is you as the app author requesting data from the server, and the form is the user providing you with that data. So there's a very strong relationship between the form that the user is going to be filling out on your site and the request you're going to be sending. And I'm going to show you that that relationship can be actually one-to-one. So we're going to go down to social auth and pop open the register route and copy this example body. And I'm just going to put that as comments in the HTML for my reference here, because what I want to do is I want to create one input for each of these fields. So we're going to start off by saying it's just going to be input type text, and the crucial thing here is name. So this is something that people often miss. And then the name, it's a bit confusing for this one because the name of this input is name, but the name of this input is going to be email. And we're basically just matching up to these API properties here. So the correct type for that is going to be email. And then we have a URL. So the banner, it doesn't actually tell you on Swagger, it tells you on the other docs that this is supposed to, actually no, sorry, it doesn't. I haven't updated it yet. As of this evening, as of 5 p.m., when we push an update to the API, this will be much more clear that you need to pass a URL in here. It's not a place to send any kind of data. It was intended to be validated for a URL, and that was missed. So that was our mistake. So this is going to be a URL with the name banner. Same thing for avatar. And then let's put password up here. So password. Okay, so that is a good start. We need a submission button as well. So this is a good start. Not very pretty, but it has, technically speaking, everything we need to register. It doesn't have any validation, and there's no event handler, so it's not going to do anything right now. But in theory, this is the minimal amount of HTML that we need. So I'm going to add some validation because we know that some of these are required. These are optional, these two, so we're not going to require those. And then for the name, there's some extra conditions. So if we go to the API, to the Swagger, and we look at model, this is a little bit nasty to read, but it does actually contain a lot of information. So we can see here that name uses the pattern, and then we have a pattern here. So I like to use this site called regex 101. I'll put it in the comments. This is what I use to sort of get visual validation on whether regex is working or not. So you just paste the expression up in the top, and then you can create some test strings. So I'm going to create a good user 123. I'm going to create a bad user with some punctuation that's illegal, and someone trying to put a email address as their username. So just by going to Swagger and finding this pattern, and then going to regex 101 and pasting it in here, we can test to see how this is going to work. So we can see that hyphens are not allowed, but underscores are, that you can use uppercase, and you can use numbers. And that is actually exactly what this little chunk here means. It matches any word character. And you can see there A to Z lowercase, A to Z uppercase, and 0 to 9 underscore. So this is a sort of shortcut, a regex shortcut. It's like a variable that represents a larger regex command. So I'm happy with that. It seems to work fine. I don't really have a reason to change it because I want my validation to be exactly the same as the API. So I'm just going to insert it exactly as it is inside there. And if we go back and give that a test, if I tried to say like this, and I try to register, it's going to say, please match the format requested. But that's not very helpful because the user doesn't know what that format is unless they go and inspect the HTML and then figure out what the regex means. So it's on the developer to provide a human-friendly explanation. And for that, we use the title tag, or the title attribute. So I'm going to say username must only contain lowercase and uppercase letters, numbers, and underscore. And then I can give an example. Okay. So now if I try and put some bad values in here, it's going to give me a much more helpful message. It's going to tell me that the pattern is not matching, but it's then going to tell me how I actually fix it. So that is the incredible power of the pattern attribute. And we're going to want to do the same thing for email because there are also extra restrictions around email. If we look here, we can see this expression here. And this one's a little bit more complicated. It allows for hyphens and dots, so I can write my email address, and the underscore, hyphen, and dot are all accepted, but any other punctuation is not. It's also going to protect against domains that are not noroff, and it should include stud dot. So again, there's no reason to write this yourself. There's no reason to do this from scratch. The best thing to do is take exactly what it says in the documentation and apply this to your user. And here I'm going to say only at stud.noroff.no domains are allowed to register. With a sort of a real social media site, you would have some sort of like confirmation on the email so that you can't just satisfy the domain name and sign up. But that's not something we're going to be implementing for this just yet. So we have a nice error message. It's clear that we have to use the right domain name. And that's the hardest part of the validation over. That's the two sort of most complicated parts of this validation. The last part is that if we look at the password, there's a minimum length of 8 characters. So that is quite an easy one to add because we have the min length attribute here. And we can say, now if I try and give a short password, it's going to tell me that we need 8 characters and we're currently using 3, so we need 5 more. So that is all of our validation done because we're using built-in methods. This form will never submit if one of these inputs is invalid, so we don't really have to check it with JavaScript because the submission event is only going to happen if it's valid. Okay, I'm just going to add a bit of window dressing here. So I'm going to say form group .mb3, and we're going to have a label, and these all need to be form control class. Okay, so I'm just going to replace all of these with the correct input, and this is just for the purpose of styling. This is not you don't need any of this stuff technically speaking. It's just to make this a little bit more user friendly. Okay, now we have a little bit nicer form, and we can add a button class as well. Okay, so that's as far as we're going to do anything with the inputs, but there is still some stuff to do with the form tag itself. So there are two important attributes for a form. The first one is method, which we're going to set to post, and the second is action. An action, if I do like this, it's going to send me to the profile page. Oh, right, it's because I'm posting if I do this. So it is going to redirect me automatically to the profile page. So that makes sense if we're registering someone, but I'm actually going to hijack this field, and I'm going to put the API endpoint that I want, because we are going to be intercepting the submission event. So we're not going to be using the default behavior, which is to send you to the action page. So instead, I'm going to use this to store the endpoint that I'm going to be using on the API. And because we have the prefix already, the API path prefix, we only need this chunk of the path. So if I change this back to post, so if I do this, it's not going to work because it's going to try and send us to a page that doesn't exist, but that's fine because we're about to add an event listener. So that's a complete registration form. It's got everything you need. If you want to add extra help text, there is a way to do that. So you can do something like this where you have div.help, hey, some helpful text. And in your style sheet, you can say input .help is what we are talking about, display none. And then if there's an input that's valid or invalid next to a help div, then we can display block. Does that work? No, because my SAS is not rebuilding. Okay, no, I don't need it the whole time, so I'm just going to run build once. Okay, there, yeah. So when the input is valid, we don't get the help text. And when the input is invalid, we do get the help text. So that's just a quick and easy. It's what, like 4 or 5 lines of CSS, and then it's just one extra class. I'm happy with the assistance I provided in the title, so I'm not going to use this, but that is something that you can use if you prefer. There are also some Bootstrap built-in advanced validation techniques that are quite cool as well, but I don't need them, I don't want them. So yeah, should you be validating in HTML or JS? You can do both, and a React application is going to use JS validation. But I think that HTML validation is so simple and so powerful, and it's also very accessible. So you don't need to do any extra work to make these error messages accessible for a screen reader or for a crawler or any of these sort of non-standard users. So this is how the browser really wants you to be doing this. This is going to work best for mobile users. This is going to work best for everyone. JS validation can be very advanced, and there are times where you need it. So I'll show you an example of when you would need JS. If you had a confirm password field here, like so, you would need to use JS to check that these two are matching. There's no way of doing that with native HTML. So there are cases where you do need JS, but for what I would consider simple validation, which is like string matching or string length or anything like that, I don't really see the advantage of using JavaScript personally. Okay, so let's move on to some JS, and we will handle this form. So I'm going to create a new file, a new folder, and I'm going to call this handlers, because all of the files in this folder are going to be doing the same thing. They're all going to be handling events. And I'm going to call this register. So we know that our form is called register form. So it makes sense that we're going to be getting that form with a document query selector. And it makes sense that we're going to be adding an event listener. And the event we're listening for is submit. We're not going to be listening for the button click event, because the only information that that's going to give us is here's a button. And that is because of the way HTML works with hierarchy. So we can see that the form contains all of the inputs. So if we have a form event, we're going to have information on all of those inputs provided in that event. But if we only listen to the event on the button, there's no other contextual information available there. So it's much less useful for us to listen to the register form, the button. So we're going to get the form, and we're going to listen to the submit, and then we have a function here, which I'll write as an arrow function, and we have the event variable or argument, and here is where we can save ourselves a lot of time. So I'll show you how students often approach this. They'll say, okay, we need the name, and that's going to be query selector input name equals name in this case, or whatever if you're using an ID or if you're using a class, password, same thing here. So this works, but it's not necessarily the most efficient way to start gathering all of this data, because all of this information is actually contained in this event already. So we don't need to do this. We just need the form, because inside here we can say event.target, like we'll rename event.target as form, and you can check that it is in fact getting the correct element in the event.target with the console log. I'm very confident that that's correct, so I'm not going to do that. Once you have the form, because we've named the inputs, because each one has an appropriate name, that allows some JS magic to happen. So I can say form.password, and that's going to give me the that's going to give me the input. So that's the same thing as doing password equals document query selector, and then I was using input name equals password. This is the same thing as this, which means that is going to be the user's password. And likewise, we can do it for their name. We can do it for the email. We can do it for the banner and the avatar. So that's one way to do it. I think everyone should agree that that's a little less hassle than having 5 query selectors, but that's too much hassle for me still. This is still inefficient. The reason I don't want to do this is because this matches the API request perfectly already. So I don't want to have to do this and then say post equal profile equals, and then just list everything again. It seems redundant. I'm doing work that I feel like I can avoid it. I've got a sense that I might be able to avoid this kind of repetition. And the way I would avoid it is by directly turning the form data into an object. So this form, clearly it has all this data contained within it. So there must be some sort of way to like shortcut from whatever this is, an HTML element, to this, the object. So what I'm going to show you is not covered in any of the coursework. You can do it this way. If you like this way, do it this way. But if you are really lazy like me and you like finding ways to solve a problem with as few lines of code as possible, then this is how you'll attack that problem. So I'm actually going to delete all of this. I don't know why Copilot is still sticking around. Okay, so we're going to use the form data class We know it's a class because it has a capital letter at the beginning, because it uses the new keyword, and because VS Code, in my case, colors it green. And we provide the form element to this constructor. Now we could do a similar thing. We could say password equals form data dot get password, and that would also work. So we could do a very similar thing to what I just showed, where you build out the object by doing these all individually. But as I mentioned, I'm very lazy. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to perform a bit of JavaScript magic by using an object prototype method. So you are all familiar with array prototype methods. You may have seen object.keys before. That's quite a useful one. That gives you that just gives you the key name of every item in the object as an array, so you can actually loop through an object. But there's a better one than that, which is entries, because it gives you the key and it also gives you the value, and that is more useful for us. So we are going to be saying form data dot entries, and that will give us an array with the key and with the value, but that's not what we want. We don't want an array, we want an object. So I'm going to say object from entries. This is a built-in part of JavaScript, and I'm going to provide it with the form data entries, that array that this is producing. This effectively is going through the process of building our object for us. And if we now log, if we now log this object, and we make sure that we have referenced the register file, so I'm going to leave it as is, and I'll just create a new link up here. So this is going to be JS handlers register. And I will also get rid of this. Okay, so hopefully if I've set everything up correctly, and we register, we did get the object, so we did get the console output, but I forgot something. I forgot to prevent default. So when we click, we're trying to go to this API path that is inappropriate. So to fix that, it's very easy. I come back in here, and on the first line of the event handler, I'm going to say event prevent default. And now, when I register, you can see that I've got all of this data nicely wrapped up in an object. I haven't had to assemble this myself. It's a direct pipeline from the form to an object, and it's going to be a direct pipeline from the object to the API. So we're trying to mess around as little as possible with the data as it's flowing through our application. Okay, so we have our profile, and this is a 4-line event handler. So that's pretty good going for a complicated form, but it's not enough. And the structure of this file is also not great, because we can't reuse this function at the moment. We have to reference it directly, and once we've run it once, it can't be sort of set again. So I'm going to remove this reference, and I'm going to repackage this file in a way that makes it more useful for us handling the code. So I'm going to create a function, and I'm going to call this set register form listener, because that's what I want it to do. And we're going to put all of this code inside the function, and that's it. So now in here, we can import set register from set register form listener, bit of a mouthful, and we can initiate it like that on our main page. So if we come in here and we test this again, nope. Oh, right, it's because I'm not actually, there's nothing in here to indicate that it actually worked. So if I do that again, it worked. Okay, so all I did there was repackage some code, and I've made it portable. And by doing this, I've also provided myself with a nice template to write other event listeners. But we're not done with this one yet. So what do we want to do once we have collected this profile data? We want to send it to the API. The principle of function responsibility says that we should not do this in the same place. We should create a new file or a new function somewhere else, and we should handle this task on its own. If we start writing API code in here, we're making it less reusable, and we're also binding two tasks very tightly together. There's the task of listening to the form, and there's the task of communicating with the API. And ideally, those should be tested individually so that you can test the form without actually sending anything to the API, and you can test the API without actually needing the form. So that's why we'd split this up in this case. So I have an API folder. I'm going to create a new folder inside that called auth, and I'm going to say register.mjs. So we have API/auth/register, and this is where we're going to handle this code. So we're going to be passing something in like register profile, like that's sort of what we want to be doing here. So it makes sense. I'll create an asynchronous function because it's going to be communicating with the API asynchronously. And we're going to call this register because that's what we already said. And it's going to accept a profile. You can call it this user or whatever, but profile is what it's called on the API. So I'm trying to keep it as close as possible to the API to reduce confusion. Okay, so we know that we're going to do a fetch here. We know that we have our constants with the URLs, and we also know that the form contains this action, and we want that too. So that's going to be relevant to our API request. So what we can do is we can say action equals form.action, method equals form.method. We could leave this out, but I'm putting it in here because it makes things, I think, more clear, but you could hard code the method quite easily. And I'm also going to provide these two as arguments to this function. You may choose to hard code both of these. Like you might want to just do this, and then inside the register function have the URL set, but I'm just doing this to show you how you can pass information through your app. So this is meant to be demonstrative, not necessarily something you have to follow. And in here, I'm going to need two more arguments for action and method, so they match up. And if I import my constant, which is called social URL, then I know that my register URL is going to be this plus the action. And if we test that out, we need to import this. Okay, so when we submit the form now, it should just console log the endpoint that we're going to be sending to. So there we have NF API on render. Oh, it's broken. We've got, if I just pull the string up so we can take a closer look at it, it's all going well until this point, and then it starts including the local hosts in here, which we don't want. So that's ideally what we're going for. I wasn't really expecting that, so I'm just going to check what is coming through on that action. Okay, this is not working very well, so I think I'm going to cut these two out. I've shown you that they exist at least, but let's just not overcomplicate things in hard code for now, because I don't want to make it more complicated than it has to be. So instead of passing this stuff in, we're just going to pass the profile. We'll keep it nice and small and neat, and then we will hard code this stuff. So we'll have const path equals auth register and method post. Okay, so we'll call it action actually. So now we have the correct URL showing there. So I'm happy that that's going to be the place we want to post our details to. So we can get rid of those. And then we're going to be fetching that register URL. We have options. So the options in this case are very important. There's a few crucial ones. So we are going to need headers because we're sending JSON. So we need to tell the server to expect JSON. We also have a method, which we've defined up here as post. And do we have anything else? We have a body, and that's going to be our profile. So it might be tempting to do that, but unfortunately that does not work because body must be a string. So instead of doing that, we are going to use JSON stringify, which I think is one of the worst named methods in the whole of JavaScript personally. And this is going to turn our object into a string, and that will be included in the body. So we could do this earlier. We could say body equals stringify, and then we can just reference that variable there, like that. So that is going to be our request. We need to await it because it's going to take some time. We want to store the response because there's going to be useful stuff in the response. But for now, let's just we'll get the result, and then we'll log the result. Okay, so this is going to send information to the API. So we should expect this to actually create a new user when we complete this. So I'm going to call this test user. I can't use my email address because I've already registered that one. I'm just going to mash the keyboard for the password because I don't really care. And we're going to register. And there we go. We got a response back. It has an ID and it has the details that we provided. So this user has officially been registered on the API. If we try to do this again, it's going to give us an error. If we look at the error, the message says profile already exists. This is because you only need to register a profile once. And in fact, you cannot register the same email address or the same name twice. So at this point, the nuts and bolts of the register flow is done. There's no there's no UX to show the user that it was a success, but we can see that it was a success in our console. So I'm going to, before we go through some UX here, I'm gonna go through the same process with login, so that we can register a new user, then we can log in with that user, just using kind of console to check our status, and then we can go back over both forms and introduce some UX after that. Is this event.target similar to using this in a class constructor? And is it possible to set up the event listener as a class? If it is, would there be any benefits? Event.target is, an event is a class, so that is a class already, and target is a property of the event class. And the target is always the HTML element that initiates the event. So if it's a click event, it's going to be the element you clicked on. If it's like a, I'm trying to think of some other common events. If it's a keystroke event, it'll be a keystroke event that's coming from the input itself. And the target is just there to tell you which HTML input initiated the event. As to whether you can or should use a class for an event listener, sure, you can. I would say that it would make sense to have a class that does handles all parts of the register process, for example. So I'll sketch it out in some code. You could have something like class auth or class auth, and you could have like a set listener function for that class and do it there. And you could have the constructor, and you could have the form in the constructor and say this.form equals form, and this.form data equals new form data form. So you could do it like this, and you would then say like document query selector my form, and then you'd use that, you'd say new auth form like that. So you could do it this way. I'm trying to keep it simple to show the actual flow. So I'm not going to be covering classes in this session, but yeah, in theory you could if you are structuring your app that way. All right, next question. Is there a drawback to doing it the lazy way? I suppose there's a slight level of control that you lose. Maybe if you do want to do some advanced validation on your inputs, you lose that chance. Maybe you want to change the format of maybe you have a mismatch between your input name and your API property. You need to change that at some point. But generally speaking, not really. I use it very often. I don't have problems with it ever. It's not supported on all browsers, so I think Internet Explorer probably won't work. But you know, I cry a tear for them. I'm not concerned about Internet Explorer. It's redundant. Can we cover avatar/banner? Yep, we will cover that. We're going to be covering updating the profile media. Why are we learning JS validation in JS1? It's more about understanding what's happening, what validation means, and how the nuts and bolts work. As in, if you let HTML do the validation for you, you're losing sight of part of the process, if that makes sense. Because you're not the one controlling every aspect of the procedure, whereas we don't always need to do that. So in this case, I'm suggesting you don't, because you don't need that level of control. But in terms of learning how validation works and what it is useful to do it with JavaScript first. Yeah, and as Eric says, if you're using any kind of framework, HTML validation is not really going to work for you. Yeah, okay, cool. I think we are up to date with questions. I'll check in about another 15, 20 minutes. Okay, so we got to this point where we can register a user. I'm going to copy this file and I'm going to rename it to be login. And here, again, I'm a lazy person. I could go and find everything that I need to change, but I know that I need to change any instance of the word register to login. So I'm just going to go and do that using the find and replace tool. And now we have the correct action. We have a better name. We have our login URL. And everything else is the same. So if we also need a form. So we might as well do the same thing here and just grab our register form and adapt it because the register and the login forms are very, very similar. So we can rename this. In fact, let's do the same thing. Rename anything saying register to login. And we just need to add a capital L there. And we don't need the banner or the avatar to log in. We don't need the name, just the email and the password. So now if we go to our login page, we have our two details there, and I don't think the event listener is being set right now because we are not setting it here. So we can duplicate this and say set login. Oh, I forgot to add a handler. So we're going to do the same thing here, copy it and adapt it. Yep, happy with that. So now finally we can reference this file, set login. Okay, we're going to run into a problem here because we're trying to set two listeners and the form only exists, like one of these is going to be wrong. One of these is not going to be able to find the form because there's not ever going to be a login form and a register form on the same page. So we might need to start introducing some routing behavior at this point. And for this, I like to use a switch, but I'll show you a simpler version to begin with. So we're going to say we're interested in the path, and that's location.pathname. So you might have used location href before. If we just check this in DevTools, we can see that that gives us a nice little string without all the localhost stuff, and we can use that to make a decision. So we've got our path, and we could say if path equals, and what is this? Profile login. Then do login stuff. Else if path is register, do register stuff. So now we have provided some sort of routing behavior just to make sure the wrong scripts aren't running. Another approach to this would be to say here if form and do not proceed if there's no form. So just in case we accidentally call this function on the wrong page, If it fails to find this login form, it just won't do anything. It's gonna short circuit and it's gonna return undefined. It won't set the listener. It won't trigger an error. So we'll do that the same with this one. So we have two layers of security here. We have the router and we have our sort of guard just in case we send the event listener on the wrong page. And now hopefully if I try and sign in, there we go. So this is the account that I have registered. Like normally it's not a test account. And you can see in the response that we've gotten my name, my email, my avatar, and we've also gotten the access token. I'm not actually sure why banner doesn't come back there. I think banner probably should come back there. So we definitely want to keep this information, and maybe we want to keep this information to hand too. So this is where the login API method is going to be a bit different to register, because with register it's like, okay, cool, we've got our result, we can just return the result. There's not really anything left to do. But with the login function, we need to use our result. So the first thing we need to do is set our token, and that's going to be result.accessToken. And we might also want to set the profile information, like the username and the email and the avatar. I'm going to show you a nice way to do that. So at the moment, we're just going to set the token, and I'm going to log in again and go to application and find my storage. And there's my token. I've got, delete all of this, do it again. There we go. So when I log in, my token gets added to local storage. And then whenever I need my token again, I can just do the reverse of this. And I can say token equals get item, like that. So that's pretty easy. But if we want to store something more complicated than a string or a number, we do need some JS for that. So I'm very quickly going to create a storage handler. And we're going to have, I'm just going to do this in one file because I don't want to focus on this. I just want to provide the functionality. So this is not going to be following the same sort of nice pattern as I've done before in interest of time. We're going to have save, export function, save, key value. And we'll have load, just with the key, and remove, just with the key. And the reason I'm putting this in a function is because I want to be able to save something more complicated than a string. So I'm going to local storage.set item key, and I'm going to set it with a JSON stringified version of our value, which means that when we load our value from local storage, we also need to pass that value. Otherwise, it will be a messy JSON string. I'm going to add a try catch here as well because this isn't always perfect. So sometimes the JSON pass, if there's a bad value, this will fail. So this is just going to make sure that if there's an error, I'm just going to return null. And then remove is very straightforward. Okay, so I've just quickly put that together. I might sort of expand that if I was going to be using local storage more, but that's fine for my purposes. So now we can import. I'm going to import all as storage from Did I name that file correctly? No, I did not. Okay, so we've got storage, and now instead of doing this, we can say storage.save token, and then access token. So that's doing the exact same thing because this is a simple string. But this also means we could save the whole profile now. So we could say profile and then just save the whole result. It's good to have these separate. So I'm going to show you a nice little trick. This is like some advanced destructuring. So instead of just getting the whole object and then picking them apart like this, we can instead do some destructuring. And we can say the first thing we want from here is the access token. And then we want everything else to be called profile. So now I can change this, and I can change this. And this is going to save the token separately and all of the details apart from the token. So if we check this, if I clear my storage and I log in again, did I get an error? Identify profile has already been defined. Okay, right. So I'm going to change this to user just to satisfy that clash there. Okay, so we have our token as a string, and we have my profile details excluding the token. So this is a nice way to chop an object up into two parts. With very, very small amount of code, you can get a lot more out of your object. That's the login function complete. There's no UX, so the user doesn't know when they've logged in, but that is now complete. And just to add some basic UX, I'm going to say you are now logged in. Oh, you are now registered. Okay, so I've got at least some sort of indication that that was a success. I've got my token, I've got my profile. So I'm going to move on to using this token next. Just check the comments quickly. Is it still the same as in first year that we can't use something, but still need to use something? Are you talking about quote style? Yeah, it's like we've actually been talking about this in the staff room this morning, whether or not we are enforcing a code style. It's slightly personal preference. If you're working in a team, you should use whatever the team is using. So they'll have a document which is like only use single quotes or only use double quotes. Don't use semicolons. Always use semicolons. Like it'll be the preference of the team, and you have to follow that style guide. When I'm writing myself, my brain is like split between two different common style guides, which is why sometimes I use sometimes I use a semicolon, sometimes I don't use a semicolon, sometimes I use double quotes, sometimes I use single quotes. Ideally, I would be running prettier every time I save, and it would be making all of that consistent for me. I'm so used to having a tool like that that does these things for me that I just sort of blindly do whatever makes most sense to me whilst I'm typing, and then solve it afterwards. So just to demonstrate that, if I press, in my case, Option Shift F, no, Command Shift, no, I'm sure it is. Okay, well, if I do this, there we go. Format, document. Did that do anything? No. think I might have disabled prettier format document. Let's check prettier here. Yeah, so I think I was getting irritated with prettier the other day, and that's why I disabled it. So yeah, there we go. If I run prettier, it's going to add all the missing semicolons, and it will change the quote type to just one that's consistent. So the important thing is being consistent. It's not actually a big deal if you it's not a big deal if you have the wrong type of quotes. Why do I use JSON stringify and JSON parse instead of saving the value straight out? It is because you can't, so if I try to save an object to local storage, it would throw an error because local storage can only store a string, and stringify turns an object into a string. So if I can demonstrate this. So if I have an object, I can stringify that object, and it gives me a text encoded version of the object. You can also do a bit of formatting, so that'll indent it if you're viewing it in HTML. But you can see that this is a string. That's the purpose of this. It turns any JavaScript value into a string. So I can do it sort of sanitizes it, makes it safe, and then JSON.parse does the opposite. So if I grab this, it turns it back into a real array. So it's just a way of switching between string encoding and object encoding in order to be able to save in local storage. All right. So I'm going to take this time to check in with my repository because I haven't been committing stuff as I work. That's okay as long as you do commit after you finished a session of work. So I would say that I'm quite happy with what I've got here. And I'm going to add pretty much all of these together because they all represent the same bit of work. So all of the changes to the HTML forms and all of the JS that I'm using to auth, that's going to be one commit, and I'm going to say adds auth code. Now we have the README. I'm not worried about that. We have our storage code, adds storage code. And I'm going to revert that change because it's just white space. And here adds README. You may notice I'm working in master. I shouldn't be working in master. I should be working in a branch, but I forgot to change into a branch when I started this. So I'm just going to stick with master for now. Okay, so we've committed all our changes. If I now had a disaster, I could always get back to this point. So if I write some code that completely messes up my application, it takes me 2 seconds to return to this checkpoint just by finding this point in the Git history and going back to that point. And we do cover that in quite a lot of detail in workflow. So in workflow, you're going to learn how to get really advanced with Git and rewind time and do lots of cool stuff. So I'm not going to get into it in this session. Okay, so I'm thinking about where to place the functions to get posts and to create posts and that sort of thing. I think it makes sense to put it in the API folder because it's an API interaction. So we will say API and then create a new folder called posts. and then I'm going to have a folder called, or a file called get, and this is going to contain two functions. Both of them are async. It's going to be get posts with an S, and there's going to be get post without an S, and that's going to require an ID. So that's the rough format. Using that logic, we can scaffold the other pages. We're going to have put, and that's going to be, we're not going to have a multiple put because you can't put multiple records on this API. So we're going to have, we'll call this update post. In fact, I think put's a bit confusing. So let's call this whole file update. We'll follow the CRUD style. So we'll have instead of having like get, put, and all that, we'll have create, read, update, delete. I think that's a bit more easy to understand. So we have an update post function, cool, and then we have a delete post function, and that's going to be, it's common to call this remove because delete is a keyword. So generally this will be remove rather than delete, just in case we trip over that that keyword. So we've got remove post, update post, read post. And you can call these what you want, as long as they make sense to you. I'm trying to keep them consistent, but the important thing is that they are clear, that their responsibility is clear. There's not like a definitive thing you do or do not need to call them. Create, read, update, delete. We're missing create. And this is going to be post data. All right, lastly, I'm going to add an index file here, and I'm going to create a barrel file. So I'm going to export everything from the sibling files here. And we want to put those in the right order as well, so they spell CRUD. There we go. So now I can, for example, in here, I can import everything from that index file, and I could say post dot create post, right? Maybe it's going to be even nicer if we change these just to be like as simple as possible. So create, remove. This is where you see if I called this delete here, it wouldn't work because that's a keyword. So that's why remove tends to be used instead. Call this read many. I'm changing these around to show you that like there's different ways of phrasing your functions depending on how you're going to use them. So in this case, because I'm using them as like a module, I want to just say post.create and post.read, post.read many. Read many is kind of gross. I don't really like that. But this is just how I'm scaffolding my module. These functions don't do anything yet. This is just me figuring out like a nice interface for myself, an interface that I'm going to enjoy. And now I'm thinking about it. I'm not so sure about this because posts.read tells me that it's going to be multiple. So yeah, I'm going to put that back. And I'm actually going to call this get because I think get is the right thing. For the rest of them, I'm fine. Am I? No. Yeah, we lose the plural data by doing that. So that's why it's not so great. So I'll put it back how it was. You've seen how I could have done it, and we're back to create post. It's just a bit more clear. We don't want to do that in here though. We want to be doing that in a handler somewhere. I'm just showing an example of how we would import and handle those files. So if we sketch out create, which is the one we're going to be using first, assuming that you're like approaching a blank database that doesn't have any existing content, you would want to create a post first. So that's why I'm doing this one to begin with. And we're going to be fetching. So we know that we need a URL. We can perhaps do the same thing here and say action equals posts. And we can say, how did we do it with this one? We had action and we just, okay. So I'm trying to keep things consistent because consistency really helps with debugging. So this is going to be the create post URL. And then we have our options. So this is where, apart from the body, which is going to be quite easy because that's just going to be stringify on post data, the headers is the thing that starts to get complicated now, because we know that we need content type because we're sending JSON. But we also need our token. So that's easy enough to do like in one case, because you can just do it like this, and then we can get our token from local. So that was load. So using our load function, we can get the token and we can put it in there. And that's fine. That works. But this is going to be kind of a hassle because we need to do this for every single request. So if we have a create post, we're going to need that. If we have a delete post, we're going to need that. If we have an update, we're going to need that. So it makes sense if we have something we need a lot to create some sort of system to handle that requirement instead of repeating ourselves. So before we progress with this, I'm going to create a new file and I'm going to call this like auth fetch or something like that. You could say fetch with token, but I'm going to say auth fetch to mean an authorized fetch. And what we're going to do in here is export an async function, and it's going to be very, very similar to fetch. It's going to have a URL and options. It needs to have a name. So the only purpose of this function is to make sure that so instead of fetching, we're going to be doing auth fetch like that. Everything else should stay the same, except we should be able to exclude that. So that's how I want to use this. It's still going to behave exactly like fetch, but it's going to include those headers for us. The headers I just deleted. There we go. So so I'm going to make this a function so that we know that we always have a fresh token value. If I just made it as like a constant, then it wouldn't update when the token changes. So it might fail to authenticate us even though we are authed. I'm just going to check this. Okay. So this little function, all it does is it returns the correct header, we could like say headers equals headers like that. But even that is too much work for me. So instead, we're going to have this auth fetch, and we're going to return fetch URL. And then here, we're going to use the spread operator. So we want to include any of the options that we've defined already. So that's this. This is the options we're providing to the function, and it's very important that we keep that data. So we're going to spread everything that we're getting provided, which this is going to be the body. And then after that, we're going to say headers equals headers. So that's going to give us this here. And it's because it's a function, it's always going to get the freshest value for the token. And all we're doing is we're returning the fetch, which means that we can use this in exactly the same way. So it's just like using fetch, except it's doing one extra thing for you. It's setting your headers for you. And let's try that out. So response, so we might expect the result to be post. So maybe we want to call that post, and we can console log the post. At the moment, I don't have a form for this, so I'm just going to test it using JS to start off with. So we want to create post, and we're going to provide title, example, body. I think those are the two fields you need to create a post. You don't need any of the rest. Yeah. API social is not defined. I thought I had a constants file there. There. Auth fetch is not defined because I didn't import it. And it's not an MJS file as well, so I need to change that. There we go. Oh, right, I forgot something. So this error, so it tried to send a request and it failed, and it said that I can't send a GET request with a body. The reason that is happening is because I forgot to specify that this should be a POST request. I had action up here, so I'm going to say method as well. And I'm just going to change that to a shortcut reference. Okay. So now we have a new error. It's saying that my authorization header, it doesn't look correct. So I'm going to go over to the network tab and take a look at what I actually sent. So in headers, we've got response headers. We're interested in request headers right now. Okay, so I sent bear instead of bearer. So if I go in here, bear token instead of bearer token. There we go. Did not know I did that. And now we have a successful post request. This is the data we provided. This is the data we got back. It's a real post. It has an ID. It was a success. So that gives us our pattern for create. The last thing we're going to want to do is return the post, because in fact we can even just return this directly. We don't have to name it, because the function's called create post, so it would be surprising if the return value of create post is not a post. And that is as much as we need to do. If you are, maybe you want to like include some default values there. So if they fail to provide like an image, maybe you want to set a default image, or maybe you want to set a tag if they didn't set a tag. But if you're just wanting to send exactly what the user's provided, this is all the code you need for it. And then we're going to be able to copy that and pretty much implement that in the other pages as well. So if we change that to update, we have post data. The method is going to be put. The action is going to be, we need to include the ID. So if we go to the documents and we look at posts put, we can see that we need the ID in there, but we don't need it to create, because we don't have an ID yet when we're creating. So method put, action is posts, and then we need the ID on there as well. So we'll have to add, we may have the ID inside this post data object. So we can actually do this. So let's change this to a string literal, because once your string stuff starts getting too complicated, it's better to switch over to a string literal, because it's easier to manage. So we're going to have action, and then we're going to have / postdata.id. So that's how we know that we're getting our update post URL. The method has been changed to put. The body is the same. So now I should be able to, if we just grab one of these IDs, so 644, I'm going to actually grab the whole object, or at least some of it, and I'm going to say update post. Okay, let's try that out. We got an error, does not provide an export called update. Oh, there we go. So here we sent a request to social post 644. We sent this as our payload, and we got our updated object back. So that is working. That is all the code you need to update a post. And it all depends on what you're passing in as this post data. So you might want to say something like, if there's no post data.id, like maybe throw an error or something, because that's not going to work. Update requires a post ID. If I try to do that now, just as an example, I'm going to get a, oh, There we go. I was saying the opposite of what I wanted there. So now if I try this, it's going to give me a JavaScript error. Error, update requires a post ID. So this is me actually choosing to create more errors for myself, if you can believe that. You might have heard me say that errors are good, that we love errors, and that a world without errors would be a horrible place to live in. That is 100% true. Errors are your friend, they're not your enemy. And sometimes we want to actually create them ourselves to help protect our own work. So this will make sure that this function will never fire if this has been left out. So that's pretty useful. And you can get really detailed with error handling as well. So you can make your functions really tight and hard to use, but that means that they are going to succeed more often and you won't get edge cases. But I'm not going to go into that anymore. That's just a little example. Delete is going to be pretty easy. So we can copy this file or we can copy the create file. It's not going to be too different. And I'm just going to rename a few things. We only need the ID to delete. The method is going to be delete. We still need to append the ID, but we're not doing post-data.id now. We're just using the plain ID here. We can use the same error here. So delete requires a post ID, and that's it. We can test it out in the same way. By saying remove post, and what was it, 644, I think. Post data is not defined on line 17. Okay, we don't need a body. So delete is just it's just a simple request with the method delete. So we don't need our body there. And we can see, so this, okay, that wasn't super clear, but this was the delete request here. And then we tried to delete the same thing twice. And it said post not found because you can't delete something that has already been deleted. So this is in a bizarre way and an indication that this has worked. I could try it with a different ID, but I'm happy that's working. All right, so that gives us a little module. Post.create, post.update, post.remove, and get posts. We also have post.getPosts. So these two are the only ones we haven't defined yet. So let's go and do those. The get requests are going to be more similar to the delete request because they're simple. So let's start with the plural. So we're going to start by getting a list of the posts. So we don't need an ID in the action now. And we don't need to send anything. In fact, we don't need to send anything here at all, which means I do need to just default this to an empty object, and then it's optional. So a get request is the most simple type of request. So we don't need to send the method. The method is automatically set to get, and we don't need to provide a body. We just need to provide our headers, and that's covered by the auth fetch function already. We don't need the method here, but if we were going to keep that, it would be get, but it's actually redundant here. Then we can copy this, call it get post like I have up here, and add the ID. Now we're going to want to take this code here, add a little error in there just in case. That's going to be get post URL, and that's also going to have the ID there. And that should be that. So if I test this one, there we have our 100 posts. Your lovely, there's my, the ones I was spamming during this session. And then these are posts that you guys have created. That's nice. So we've got our bulk get. Let's just pick 640 there, and we'll say post.getPost 640, then console log. And sure enough, we have post 640 there as it should be. So how are we doing on time? Got 15 minutes, and then we'll be at the 2-hour mark. I'm happy to keep going with this if everyone else is. I think we've got more to cover, but I appreciate it's going to be getting long, so I think we'll have another break soon. And I'll just switch to some comments now as well, see if we've got questions. Bears, yep, I've I've found that pretty funny. Great bears take a hike, absolutely. So the HTML, yeah, we'll get there. So I did auth form first, and I did this API first. So it doesn't, you don't necessarily have to do one of those in a particular order, but we will do the HTML forms for creating and updating posts next. Would this also recognize that you are the owner of the post? Yes, it would. That's what the JWT token is for. So if I try and edit someone else's post, you'll see what happens. So if I go in here and I'll just grab this one, 568, and then I'll try and delete that post. So you see this error 403? That means that I don't have permission to delete someone else's post. So if I was to look in this here, it says you do not have permission to delete this post. Why are my scripts at the top? Do you mean at the top of my HTML file? Like here? Yeah, so I could put these at the bottom of the body, but I have this keyword here called defer. And what defer does, well, defer means do it later. So by adding defer, these actually get run down here. But because in theory, at least, the head is all meant to be non-visible metadata, and the body is all meant to be visible presentation data, I don't really like putting scripts in the body. I think that makes me feel weird. It's not the right place for them, in my opinion. And considering that we have this little keyword defer, it's the same thing. It will perform in the exact same way as putting them at the bottom. But I just like to have all of my non-visible content gathered in the same place. Okay, can I slow down? Unfortunately not, because I'm trying to cover an exercise that you guys have a week for in 2 hours. But this is all being recorded, and if you want to watch it like at literally a slower speed on YouTube, you'll be able to do that. Appreciate that I'm rushing. Um, could you explain quickly when to use MJS and JS? Yeah, it's an interesting one. I don't really use MJS files myself. I'm using it because it's in the content. Technically speaking, any file that is formatted correctly will work, but the file extension gives you a little hint about what type of file it is. So you have .cjs, you have .mjs, and you have stuff like JSX for React, right? Um, and these are all just telling us that there's a sort of slight variation on how the file is presented. So for example, MJS is telling us that it's a module. CJS would be telling us that it's using common JS format. JSX is going to be telling us that there will be markup and sort of React style data in the file. So it's really a way of like clarifying what kind of style of JavaScript you're expecting to find, but they're all JS files. So I could have changed this to just plain JS files, but I think it's more clear that I'm dealing with modules. So yeah, that's why we have that choice there. Okay, so I'm freaking out about the delivery. Right, that's a good point, Martin. So the way this project is being like the way you guys are writing this is unusual in the sense that normally you would have a bundler. So you would have a tool that's going to like um, help you with all your assets, including your JS, and that will automatically convert it from like one type to the other. But because this is a pure JS exercise, we wanted you to write code that's going to run directly in the browser and not go through a separate step. We're going to cover bundlers in workflow. We're going to be using Vite to assemble our content. So all files in one project would be the same. Maybe not. You may have different types of JS files in one project. Yeah, I'll try to slow down, but as I said, we're pretty constrained with time. This is going to be on YouTube, so you have the whole weekend to watch it at 0.25 speed. All right. Okay, let's do some UX, some UI even for. In fact, let's do some committing first, and then we'll go on to the user interface side of things. So we've got this auth fetch, we've got create, delete, read, update. So I think those make sense to go together. Add post API methods. And we don't really want to commit this because this is just testing files. So we ignore that one. All right, so we don't have any pages we've got our pages for login and register, but we don't have a page for posts. So I'm going to create that. I'm going to say posts index.html, and I'm also going to do post index.html because we're going to have, or maybe yeah, I'm going to do it like this. So this is a choice. I could have had both of them in this folder, but because we're going to use a query string instead of having, like, if you were writing a proper application, you would have like posts and then the ID or the name of the post, but we're going to have post ID equals using a query string. So I would prefer it to be post singular rather than post plural there. That's just my preference. So that's why I've called the file what I've called it. In terms of content, I'm just going to grab the the index, the main index file, and then cut this content out of the middle, so we just have one column. So this is going to be our list of post thumbnails. And then we're going to have a very similar thing here. And this is going to be our post page. So our post page, we have a view. So we have, we're going to have like myapp.com/posts and then the ID. We also want to have an edit. So myapp.com/post/edit and then ID. So that means that we need to nest one file or one folder in here called edit index.html to get that nice URL. And we're going to put the same HTML in there. So we just have these blank pages at the moment. If I go to posts, it's a blank page. If I go to posts, it's a blank page. Nothing special really going on there. And I do need to get rid of my test code. So no more console errors, and we have a blank page. All right, so let's talk about like the requirements for posts. Displaying the post is going to be a case of if you are using inner HTML, if you're using create element, whatever you're using, that's going to be where that kicks in. So I'm going to create a new folder called templates, and I'm going to have a post template. And we're going to be exporting a function called post templates. It's going to accept post data. And there's a few different ways to skin the cat here. We could go with like just returning a string. So we could have like this post and then put like post data.title or something in there. So that won't actually render anything. It'll just give you the HTML. And then you might have something like a export function render post template. Where you can say parent.innerhtml equals, or maybe plus equals. If you have a list, it's going to be a little different depending on what you're doing. And then you just call this function here with your post data. So that's a pattern you might be roughly using. You might be doing it. So I'm going to keep all of these. So I'm going to say post template A, and then we'll do B with create element. So here I'm creating a div and giving it the class of post so that these two match up. And then I also need to say inner text is going to be post data.title. And as long as I return the post, these are doing similar things, but they're not doing identical things. And I wouldn't be inserting it like this. So if we were using example B, it would be parent.append, and then it would be the contents that we're creating here with post data. This one, the option B, has the advantage that you can add an event listener before you actually render the content. So like if we change our template a little bit and we add a button, so I'm going to add a button that when you click it, I want to log the post data to the console for debugging. And if I'm working in create element, I can say button equals create button, create element button, and post.append button. Okay, so now these are the same. But when it comes to adding the listener, I can just say button.add event listener, click, console.log. Gee, that's not correct. Need to put that in a function. Console.log post data. That's very convenient. Trying to do the same thing here is going to be much more tricky. So you would have to do the same thing, you would have to wait until this has been loaded into the HTML. And then you would have to say document query selector, find me a post, and then find me a button, then add the event listener, click, so on and so forth. And here you have a problem because the post doesn't have any unique information on it. So now you'd have to say, okay, post ID equals post data dot ID, so that down here you can say that you specifically want one with the ID of like 454 or whatever it is. So that's hassle because you're creating something and then you're immediately going and like searching the document for the thing you've just created, which is not very efficient when you can create it in a way where you can start working with it before you've even entered it into the document. I don't actually want this button stuff, so I'm going to get rid of the button. I'm just going to stick with a really simple template. And I'm going with option B. So this function, if you give it a post and you give it a parent, it will put the post template inside the parent. So let's try, I'm going to create another barrel file here to make it easier to import the stuff. And then in our main file, I will import everything from the templates folder. So now I'm going to create a little test function. I'm going to await I need to go and get my API postcode again. So I'm going to await post.get posts. So I'll get a list of posts. And then I will pick one of those posts. I'll just choose the last one using pop. And then we'll render that post. So we've got our render post template function here. We're going to give it the post and then the parent. Let's take a look at our HTML file for this. We've got the container fluid. I'm going to give that an ID of post so that we can quickly grab container. And here we're saying when this function gets called, go and get the full list of posts, or go get 100 posts, pick one of those posts, get the container from the HTML file, and then render the post template inside the container. Oh, okay, so I've got a clash because I'm calling multiple things post here. So I'm going to rename this as post actions, or post methods. Hello. If we change this, like pick the 45th post, for example, and the 46th post. Fair enough. I feel that way often. So this is just a little test routine to make sure that our post template is kind of doing what we expect. And then we are probably going to want to have a function to do multiple posts. So render post templates with an S maybe. And this is going to be post data list and parent. And here we would loop the post data list. Would we? Yeah, we could map it even. So for each post, so this is just going to be an array of posts in the same way that we get here. So this is what we're handling, and we can map that array. So we're going to have one post or post data, and we can do something with that post data. We can use it to complete this template, right? So we can actually just do that straight like that because post data matches the value of this loop. If we wrote it like this, it would be like that. That's the context we're in. We're looping, we're handling a single post at a time, and we're going to pass that directly to our function. But because those two things match, we can just do that. That's going to give us our list of post HTML elements. And then we can parent.append, and we just need to spread those. So looking at this, we can refactor that a little by getting rid of this and just saying append the mapped list. So we've mapped an array of post data items, and for each post data item, we've provided it an HTML template, and then we're going to pass that into the parent. So if we go back to our test script here, we can say render post templates. I actually have my templates here, so I don't need to do that. Templates dot render post templates with an S, and we're going to give it the list of posts instead of one post. And now we have one of these items for every single item in the array has been matched up with an HTML tag. It's very simple. Obviously, you're going to want to decorate and adorn these items much more than I am. I'm just doing this for the purposes of demonstration. But that's roughly speaking how you're going to be handling the logic for templating. There are some other ways you can do this, but I think I'm going to hesitantly not show you those to avoid making life too complicated. Um, but I think I'm going to do a separate session which is not related to the CA on other ways to achieve these kinds of tasks. Because anyone who's used create element a lot will know that these functions get really ugly and really big and kind of hard to read eventually, especially when you've got like a very detailed HTML. So we do recognize that create element is not the nicest thing to use in the world. There is a way of combining the best of both worlds, and that's using DOM parser. So if anyone knows what I'm talking about when I refer to DOM parser, you can shoehorn that in, but I'm not going to show you in this session. We really advise that you put your project in for review earlier rather than later. This gives us more time to look at everyone's projects and give them the proper amount of time they need to be reviewed. It also is going to leave you with some time to implement your feedback. So if you put in your project for review in the last week, you're probably going to be fighting with a lot of other students who are trying to get their project reviewed just at the same time. If you do get it in early, it's more likely to be reviewed immediately, or at least within the next like day or 2 days, and that will give you a bit more of a runway for making changes. So I highly recommend that. You don't have to, as long as you've got the core requirements, you've got the CA requirements, you don't need all the additional features. You can ask for a review before you start implementing additional features. So the last things we're going to cover in this session, we've done a simple template for like showing a thumbnail for an item. We're also going to do a template for creating and editing a post. And then finally, we're going to look at updating a profile with the profile media. And at that point, I'll talk a little bit about how the images should be handled, how they should be uploaded, and how they should be rendered. Yeah, and don't forget peer review as well. It's an important part of the process. We don't tell you to do it for no reason. Reading other people's code, seeing how they've approached a problem is a really good way to learn. And getting that feedback from your peers is also very helpful too. So this is not just like an exercise we have created for fun. This is meant to be something you can use to improve your project. It also means that you'll have more than one person looking at your review. So you'll have a professional review from one of us, and you'll also have a peer review or hopefully more than one peer review. And with 3 different sets of eyes on the same project, you should get good feedback from that. Yeah, so a PR is a pull request, and then a PR then gets reviewed. And once a PR has been reviewed and accepted or approved, then it can be merged into main. So it's like a guard. It's a way to guard the code that makes it into your master branch or your main branch. So I suggest for peer feedback, create a pull request and post the pull request to the forum so that everyone can go and look at that directly and they can make comments on the actual pull request rather than in the forum. And then in the forum, you can just say, check the pull request for my comments, just so that you've actually made your post and it's registered there. Okay, so we've done our simple, very, very simple post templates. And now we need a form to edit the posts or to add a post. So I think that it makes most sense to, instead of using like a JavaScript template like this, it makes more sense to actually write the form. So what we're going to do to save a little bit of time is we'll go back to the profile register, and I'm going to copy this form just to get a few things for free, so that it has the same structure, and pop it in here. So this is now going to be called edit post, and we are going to have, I'll get rid of all of these fields. So what do we need to edit a post? Let's go to the docs, and we have posts put, and we have these string, body, tags, and media. So title and body are both just free text, so they're quite easy to represent in a input, because that's just going to be type text. Title is going to, name is going to be title. It's required, but it doesn't require a special pattern. We might choose to put like a max length on here. So this is something we're going to be enforcing for our user. If we wanted like maybe 100 characters as our maximum title length. But this is not an API setting. This is just a setting for your front-end application. So I'm going to keep it as simple as possible and just have the body. This is going to, actually this won't be an input, this is going to be a text area, because we want a bit more space here. So we don't want a single line, we want to be able to write paragraphs. It still works the same though, so we're still using name, and we're still using the same class, but it's just a different type of input. Then we have tags. So tags is going to be, it's also going to be text. The only difference here is it's not required, and ideally we want this to be comma delimited, but I'm going to come back to that because at the moment we'll just leave it like leave it as it is. And what else do we have? Media. So media is an image, but it's not an image upload. So if it was an image upload, we would have like file, type file, but there's no upload capability on the server. So instead, we are just going to provide a URL, and that's also optional. So we're not using required for that. In fact, we need to put required here in our text area. And then finally, our button is going to be update post. I should have done the create post form first, but they're actually almost identical. So I can take this edit post form, and I can go, let's create a new folder called create to put our create form, and I'm going to copy pretty much exactly what the edit form is doing, except I'm going to call this create post instead of edit post. All of the fields will be the same, and this will just say create. So it's very, very similar. You could even use the same HTML. So if you're making something that's more like a single page application, you might choose to use the same form to do both, because it's just going to be the listener that's different for these. But just to keep things separate and keep things very, very clear, I'm going to have these as two separate forms with two separate listeners. So we've got our content, and if we go to the URL there, create, post create, we have our form, but no form listener yet, and it's not connected to the API methods yet. So we're going to go to our listeners folder, or our handlers folder, and we're going to create a new handler, and that is going to be called create post. May as well create the other one, which is going to be update post. And here, if we look at one of these, we can grab that to give us a kind of pattern to work from. So instead of logging in, we're going to be importing create post, and the form is going to be called create post. We're still setting a submit listener. We're still preventing the default, and then we're running through the exact same little trick here to generate our object from the form data. So the only thing we need to do here is rename this variable profile to post, and then we're going to change this and change this. Create post. We can then copy that, and it's going to work almost the exact same way, except this is going to be called update, and we're going to be calling, in fact, I'm just going to change that slightly. So all I'm doing here is changing where I'm importing from so that I can use the exact same import to get the other method. Just keeps things consistent. Okay, so there's possibly one thing that's going to be missing for update, which is that we need to make sure that that ID is going to be contained in this object. We have, if we go to the update post handler, sorry, the API method for this update, we have this thing here saying that we should throw an error if there's not a post ID. Again, this is optional. You don't have to have this, but I've chosen to do this just to make my life, I think, easier. So it is going to be important that we keep that in mind, that we do need an ID inside here, and it might not necessarily, it isn't going to be in the form, right? Like if we take a look at the form, all of our data is coming from this form, but it doesn't actually contain an input called ID. There's nothing like this called ID, because the user would have to fill that out themselves, right? If you were going to the update form, edit is what it's called. So you would need to have something like this, post ID, and that's very un-user friendly because hopefully the user is not really aware of like the numerical ID of the item, and if it's not a numerical ID, it might be a GUID, a GUID, and that's going to be like a long string. It'll be like a sort of string like this, you know. No one's going to want to sit there and type that out for themselves. So this is something that needs to be solved. And I'm actually going to leave this input here, but I'm going to change it to type hidden. So now it's still there in the markup, but what we're saying is it's not the user's responsibility to populate this because the user might not know what the correct ID is. And if we're editing a post, we need to have edit ID equals whatever, right? We need to have that query string in the URL. I don't know why it's not letting me do that. Okay, yeah. So that's how the URL needs to look. Otherwise, we don't know which post we're editing. So what we can do is we can grab this ID and put it into that hidden form, that hidden input. So if we go to our handler, our register, our update post handler. We're going to need to do a little bit of extra work here. We need to get the search params. The shortest way to do that is to construct a new URL class and then access the search params from that. It's the same thing as doing new URL search params. Then we're going to get the ID from the URL, and we have the form, so we can, before we set the listener, form.id, let's just check the HTML there. So we're using the name, referencing the name, and I called it ID. So form.id.value equals ID. That's a problem, because that is clashing with the actual ID of the form, so I can't do that. That's frustrating. Okay, so that's not actually going to work. Forget about the hidden input. I'm going to insert post.id equals ID there. So I'm just going to manually set that. I wanted to have it as part of the form, but that's not really going to work out for me. So instead, I'm just going to make sure that we're including the ID in the object there. So if we go back to create post, this should work just fine. So we can test this. Okay, so let's open up the network tab. We have a 200 success. It has given us, oh no, that's not, that is coming from this test template thing. So we're actually going to get rid of that. Doesn't seem to be sending, so I think I've forgotten to actually, I forgot to use it here. So we can extend our else if here and say if the path equals posts, or what is it, post/create. So if the path equals post create, then we want to set our this listener. I didn't rename this, so this is called set create post form listener. And this is also going to be changing to set update post listener. And then I'm going to create a barrel file for those as well, because I don't have one here, and I love barrel files so much. Okay, this means that I can do a similar thing here, and I can say import all as listeners. Can then remove those because I've changed the way I'm importing that, so I can now say on these ones that they're going to be listeners dot, and that's the exact same thing referenced in a different way. And now I can say listeners dot set create post, and then we'll add another one here. If path equals post edits, I think we called it, then listeners set update post listener. Okay, and we're going to come back to this because there's a better way to do this, but for now that'll be fine. And now we should have our listener working. Create post. We sent a post request to the right endpoint. It came with a 200 response. We sent this data, and here's our result with an ID, with a created date, with an updated date, and count and stuff. So that is our create form connected. And the create form is easy because you're always going to start off with a blank slate, right? Like a new post starts off undefined and you define it through the form. So this is much easier than the update form. For the update form, we have to do something a little bit special. Ideally, if I'm updating something, all of these fields should be populated already. Like if I'm updating this, it should already have the title and the body and the tags and stuff in this form to make it easier for us. So we need to hydrate this form if we're going to go and do edit. So let's keep going with this one that we just created, 648. So I'm going to put ID equals 648 in here. And in theory, if I test this out now, it will work. I have a new title and a new body and update. It didn't trigger. Maybe because the URL is wrong. Okay, so it's setting the listener, but it's not quite doing what I want. Maybe I got the ID wrong of the form. Yeah, I did. So this is called edit post, and I was looking for update post. So that's why it wasn't finding the form. So now we need to put our ID back there, 648. And let's try again. So completely new title, completely new body, a tag, a second tag, and then we'll leave media for now. I'll get to that. So we've sent our request. It was a put request. It returned with a success status code of 200. This is the data that we sent, and this is the data that we received in return. And we can see that everything has been updated nicely. Our tags didn't actually work. I can't actually remember off the top of my head how to get to arrange the tags exactly, but I do have a project where that's working, so I'll have to come back and figure that one out. But the point is that if we wanted to, like if I went to this URL fresh like this, we should see this. We should see the details populated for us like this. So that's a challenge that you have to face with the update form. And roughly speaking, how you would do that is you could make this an asynchronous function, and you could get the post. So it would be await get post, and you'd pass the ID. And then maybe we want to wait until we know we have a form to actually deal with before we do that. So we're getting our post And then we are going to want to populate the form with the post values. So we can say form.title, title.value equals post.title, and go through, and all of the named attributes we can fill like this: body, post, form.tags, value is going to be post.tags, although that might be a bit funky, and media. Okay, so hopefully if I refresh this page, there we go. There's a second before the request comes in, and then when the request comes in, we have our data. It might be a good idea to disable the form until that is done. So we can say form, can we do disabled on the form? Or let's do it on the button. So form.querySelector button dot, actually let's make that a variable. So we're grabbing the button, the submit button, and I'm going to say the button is disabled. And then once we've actually loaded the form, then we can undisable that button. So that's just going to prevent someone from accidentally submitting before this is finished loading. You can see the color of the button changing there. That's just to make sure that no one sort of overwrites an object before this is finished loading. Finally, on this subject, I'm going to talk about media. So this was one of the big confusions. There's two things to know about this. There's two complications here. The first one is that this field should be a fully formed image URL. So it's going to be something beginning with HTTPS. Then there's going to be a image host, and then some sort of ID or name of the image. And then you might have like a JPEG or a PNG or an SVG extension like that. So this is the format that is expected. But if I try this, hopefully that doesn't work. Actually, no, sorry, I haven't pushed this change. So this does work for now, but this won't work after today. So after the purge, it's going to check that this is a real image. And if there's not actually a real image there, it's going to return a 400 error. So you need to make sure that you're actually linking to like a real image, and that image doesn't have like a restriction on it. So sometimes people don't want their images being like linked to all around the internet, so they kind of restrict where it can be shown. If you've seen 403 errors when dealing with images, that is why, because the owner of that image has decided not to make it a sort of publicly available image. Like, for example, you can only view it if you go directly to their site. So this, after the purge, this will check the availability of your image for you, and it will tell you if that image is not available and tell you to use a different one. So if you're looking for a quick, easy way to test, this is my suggestion. This is pixum.photos. If we go to pixum.photos, they have a whole site that is dedicated to testing. You can grab a random image. You can set the dimensions of the image. If you want to use the same image over and over again, instead of getting a random image each time, they have all of these IDs here. So you can pick an ID. So if I want the deer, I would grab this ID. In fact, if I can just copy this link and go back in here, and I can use that update post, and that is going to work. So if I was to take this and make a, oops, didn't mean to do that, or that, if I shove an image tag in here, that's going to render my div. So in terms of templating, templating for images, if we go back to our post template and we add an image to this, so we could say if post data dot media, then we can say image equals document create element image, or we could say new image, but I think it's more consistent just to use create element for everything. They do the same thing. We then want to say image.source equals postdata.media, and then we also want to set an alt attribute for this as well, which might be like postdata.title, or you might want to say like image from. Something like that, just to give it some sort of helpful text for someone who is not not using the site visually necessarily, or a SEO bot, something like that. And then finally, we just need to append the image into our post. And now if we go and run our test function again, go back to the home page. Was it? No, it was posts, right? Can't read property of null. So now we've got our title, and for any of the posts that have a media, we're also showing an image for those two. We can decorate that a little bit better, by using Bootstrap styles or using your own CSS, but I'm not really interested in demonstrating that stuff because that's kind of from the last course. All right. So this is also a good time to do a check-in with Git. We've expanded our router quite a lot. We've added these two new handlers, and we've got templates. So I'm going to put all this stuff together. Okay, we're running on for 3 hours now, which I think is maybe pushing the limit. So what I'm going to do, I'll show you update profile, and then the final thing I want to talk about is this mess here. We need to fix that mess. So 2 more things. So in our profile HTML, we have index, we have register, we have login, and we also have edits. So we can go to edit profile here, and now we are on this page. And surprise, surprise, we're going to have a form. So let's go ahead and grab this form. And change the details we need to change. So this is going to be edit profile. And the only thing we can edit is the banner and the avatar. Nothing else. So we're taking all of these away. And we're going to say update profile. And then take a look at these. Okay, well, this has to be a URL. And the name is going to be banner. and it's not actually required, it's optional. And this is going to be name avatar. It's also not required, but you may choose to make it required. So if you want everyone in your application to always to have an avatar or a banner, you can choose to require this, but it's not required by the API. So I'm just doing what the API says here. Okay, maybe we want like a name and a email, just to sort of give us some context for this form. In fact, I thought of a better way of doing that. So we can use form inputs. We're going to have name, we're going to have email, and this is going to be text and email, but these are both going to be disabled and they're not going to be named. So these are just here to show information. They are not going to be something that the user can interact with. You can't actually click on them. It doesn't really give you a visual cue there. That's a little bit annoying. Like I would kind of, I would want my disabled form field to look like that, you know, so that it's a bit more clear that you can't touch it. And I would also want cursor no, not allowed, like that. So I'm actually just gonna add that to my custom styles because that's quite important to me for my UX. So form control disabled, and we're going to go half opacity, I don't know how you actually say that, and cursor not allowed. And we need to build. Okay, so now it's clear that these are not things that the user is intended to actually fiddle with. These are things that the user is intended to fiddle with. And then we're going to do the same thing in our, just like the edit post handler here, the update post handler, where we're doing this async operation to hydrate the form. We're going to do something really similar. So new handler, it's going to be called update profile. We will take this update post because this is probably going to be the one that is going to be most similar. And then it's just, we're going to have to, I don't think we actually have a function to update the profile at this point. No. Okay, so we can set the listener. We're going to get the name instead of, so this will be, in fact, no, we can only edit our own, you can only edit your own profile, right? You can't edit someone else's profile. So how do we get the name, the correct name here? We can say load profile. And we know that the profile.name is going to be whatever we saved. So we don't actually have to do any async stuff. Which is pretty cool. Maybe we do. Some of it we can get from here. So we can do a bit of fancy destructuring and we can say name, email. We can at least get that from profile. And then over here we can say form.name.value equals name, form.email.value equals email. This is going to be get profile, which we haven't actually created. This function doesn't exist yet. So I'm sketching this out, but this isn't going to work until we add that function. This stuff is going to be all the same. We don't need the post ID. This is going to be profile, not a post. And this is going to be update profile. So what I'm doing here is just making sure that the banner and the avatar values are fresh from the server, because it's possible that you loaded the site, you loaded that stuff into your local storage, and then it changed in the background. So this way we can be sure that these two values are going to be fresh, and then since those are the values that we're allowed to edit, it's important that they are fresh. So this will not work until we've gone and added our profile slash update.mjs. It's going to be pretty similar to our post update.mjs because it's the same task for a different type of data. So our action is going to change to profiles with an S. The method is going to be the same. This is going to be called update profile. This is going to be profile data instead of post data. We can change this to name and say that update requires a name. Pretty much just changing everything that's got post to profile. Here we've got the path, and that's going to need to be profile data.name as well. Okay. So that looks fine to me. I think I've updated everything correctly. So we can use that in our handler, which I've now lost. Yep. So we're going to be, oh, we need a get profile as well. Okay, so this should be really straightforward, apart from the fact that this is name instead of ID. Okay, and we can even say the default for this should be us. We could do something like that and say that if we don't provide an argument, we should use our profile, but I'm not going to do that. Keep it simple-ish. All right, barrel file. Okay, so now we should have everything we need. We should have, if we change this to profile or profiles, I think it should be profile with an S. There we go. Profile with an S. Nope, nope, nope. There we go. And this is going to be get profile, update profile. We don't need this. Okay, so I'm just going to run through this from the top to the bottom. We have a function to get the data for our profile. We have a function to update our profile. Then we're going to grab the form we're going to pull name and email from local storage. In fact, I'm going to pop that in here as well. We're pulling name, email from local storage, then we're waiting for the API request to give us the freshest values for these two. So in fact, I could put these here, and that could happen sooner. I can show you what the effect of that is just now. And in theory, if I put my name here, let's see what went wrong there. I did get my name correct, that's reassuring. Cannot read properties of null, so that's telling me that my... Oh, right, okay. Yeah, I keep forgetting to turn off my testing function here. I'm actually just going to delete it because I'm done with it now. So, still not hydrating as I would expect. Right, because once again, I've forgotten it from here. So else if path equals, and then what are we on? Profile edit, listeners, set, need to add it to this barrel file here. That's why I can't get to it right now. Oh, I called it, there we go, profile. Okay. Cannot create property value on string. Oh, right. Yes, that's not going to work like that. So I said earlier that the name attribute of a form input's really important. The reason it's giving me an error here is because I didn't put a name on these two inputs. So I can fix that by naming them. And there we've got the avatar. I don't have a banner set, so maybe I want to grab something cool. I kind of like this one. Oops. So I'm going to put that as my banner. Update requires a name. Okay, so this is our error. This is the error that I wrote. So I should know exactly where to look for the problem there. So it's hitting this error. It's telling me that I'm not passing this correctly. Okay, so it's it is because disabled inputs don't get included in this little package here. So I need to manually add that myself. How do I do that? So I would do that in the handler. I know this is getting confusing. Profile. So I would do it here. Profile.name equals name. Profile.email equals email. Okay, I got a 404 on my own on my own account. I don't actually know why. Um, hmm. I'm not sure why that's not working. If I look at the payload, that's fine. If I go to the docs and sanity check myself, aha, I need this media part of the URL is what I'm missing. So if I go back in here and I go to the update profile, I need to update this path, and I need to say media at the end there to match this. And there we go. It has updated. So if I refresh the page now, it's going to recall that banner image for us. So without showing you the kind of user experience side of this, that's actually covered like almost 100% of the requirements. Like there's lots of work that can go into improving the experience and making it feel more like an application than I have the time to do here. But this covers the bases. This is actually contains all of the code that we need. There is plenty of clearing up to do, and the only thing I'm going to clean up before we go to questions is that home page. And I'll show you what a nice approach for that is. So this is all about updating ads code for updating profile media. Okay. So I'm not gonna make any more functionality changes. My functionality is actually complete. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna refactor this by creating a new file called router.mjs. And I'm going to copy all of this and move it over here. Okay, so I'm not even importing this as a variable. I'm just saying whatever's in here, stick it in here. And everything should still be working. So if we go to the login page, if we go to the register page, actually no, those aren't going to be post edits. All of this stuff is still working. So we haven't changed anything. We've just reorganized it here. And now I'm going to replace this kind of ugly block here with a switch statement. So we're going to say switch, and the best way to think about a switch statement is that it's exactly like a physical switch, except usually a physical switch is on off. This can have many, many different settings on the switch. So we are just saying if this path matches this, then we do this. Break. And we can do that for all of these. So it's going to be register. Then we have post create. post edit. And profile edit. We can now delete this because we should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cases. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cases here. And we can have a default case as well. So if the URL doesn't match any of these, maybe we want to like go to a 404 page. So we could say location.href equals 404.html, something like that. And then we want to finally, I would put this in a function. And then maybe we would change this to like, we can even do a default. Let's do a default export. Okay. And we can see that it's still working because if we go, oh, there's a 404 page. So that's that's telling us that the home page we don't actually have anything to happen for our home page. So maybe I'll set the default behavior to be go to the home page. So if I think that works better. Nope, that's looping. That's bad. Maybe these should return. That is still looping. Yeah, I don't think that's a good idea. I'm going to get rid of the default case because it's causing more trouble than it's giving me benefit. But it's common to use that default case to send the user to a 404 page, for example. And you would hopefully have you would have a case for your home page. You'd want to show something, right? All I'm doing in this router is setting listeners, so you might want to do more than that in your router. So the final commit is adds router with switch logic. And that is the CA. So we'll do some comments. I know that was a lot. Yeah, so I'm just reading Martin's comments here. Yeah, slowly catch a monkey is what we say around here. Yeah, this was a rush. It was a bit of a race to cover all of the content in, I think we've been going for about 3.5 hours now. I do recommend taking this, like, I'll try and split the YouTube file up into sections so that, like, bookmarks, so that you can go to a specific part of the video if you don't want to watch the whole thing. Just a reminder, this is my way of approaching this problem. This is not the only way. This is not the correct way. It is a correct way. There's a lot of variation that can happen. There's a lot of different personal styles involved and personal preferences involved. So this is just how I have thought about this and how I've approached this. I do have the repo, but I'm a little hesitant to give you the repo because it's going to be pretty useful for your CA. So I think we'll probably discuss that in the staff room and get back to you on it. Um, I would rather you try and follow the video and do it based on like concept than like referring directly to the code.